We are back here on WLTH 1370M. That's 219-885-1371. The number again, 219-885-1371. Let us know what you think about what our government's doing in Ukraine and our role in Ukraine, or what you think about the U.S. government's role in the assassination of Malcolm X. Yes, and don't stick around later. We've got the Happy Happies coming up. We got one. I think a lot of you guys will be surprised with the musical spotlight. But we just finished talking about how the U.S. government and its Western allies essentially sabotaged a peace deal, according to the former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Perez. I mean, not Naftali Perez. Naftali Perez was a baseball player, but Naftali Bennett is the former Israeli prime minister. So yeah, the U.S. blocked efforts to try to broker a peace deal that would have saved probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people from getting killed and millions of lives being destroyed. But also in the last week, we found out now basically what most people already kind of figured if they were not submerged in American media, corporate media propaganda, which is that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that had been used, that had been providing Western Europe with cheap Russian natural gas for more than a decade, was actually destroyed by the U.S. government. Now, it's important to understand that last June, Navy divers that were operating under the cover of a widely publicized midsummer NATO exercise known as Ball Tops 22 planted the remotely triggered explosive that 3 months later destroyed 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines, according to some sources. Now, this is coming from Seymour Hersh. Now, who is Seymour Hersh? He's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. He actually was the one who exposed the My Lai massacre that we talked about when Colin Powell died. I think we talked about that when Colin Powell died, maybe last year, or was that 2 years ago when Colin Powell died? Well, anyway, Seymour Hersh was the one who exposed that. He's considered maybe the greatest living investigative journalist, as Claire Daly talked about in the intro. And so anyway, this pipeline had been providing Germany and Western Europe with cheap gas, Russian gas, for more than a decade. Nord Stream 1 had. A second pair of pipelines called Nord Stream 2 had been built but were not yet operational. Now, with Russian troops massing on the Ukrainian border and a possible Ukraine war looming, Joe Biden saw the pipelines as a vehicle for Vladimir Putin to weaponize natural gas for his political and territorial ambitions. Joe Biden's decision to sabotage these pipelines came more than 9 months after a highly secret back and forth inside Washington's national security apparatus about how to best achieve that goal. Now, it's important to say that, once again, our government did this specifically so they would not have to claim credit. They did this under the guise of, well, they did it to keep it from the public. So what they did was they used Navy divers only and not members of America's Special Operations Command, whose covert operations must be reported to Congress. They did not want this to be reported to Congress and briefed in advance to the Senate and House leadership, the so-called Gang of Eight. The Biden administration was doing everything possible to avoid leaks, as the planning for this took place in late 2001 and into the first months of 2002. So again, this is even before Putin invaded. They were planning this already.
Wait a minute. 2001 and 2002.
2021. I'm sorry. 2021 and 2022. I'm sorry. So this, in the months before Putin actually invaded Ukraine, they were already working on this because, Trump, the Republicans had been saying, hey, we got to get rid of Nord Stream 2 for a long time because, again, this provides Western Europe with cheap Russian gas, keeps them dependent on Russian gas. Biden and his foreign policy team, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, Secretary of State Tony Blinken, Victoria Nuland, the Under Secretary for State Policy, had been very vocal and consistent in their hostility to the two pipelines, which ran side by side for 750 miles under the Baltic Sea from two different ports in northeastern Russia, near the Estonian border, passing close to the Danish island of Bornholm before ending in northern Germany. It's important, once again, to reiterate from its earliest days, Nord Stream was seen as a threat to Western dominance by Washington and its anti-Russian NATO partners. The company behind it, Nord Stream AG, was incorporated in Switzerland in partnership with Gazprom, a publicly traded Russian company producing enormous profits for shareholders, which it is dominated by oligarchs and is known to be in the thrall of Putin. So these are Putin's people who are making all this money from these pipelines. Now, Gazprom controlled 51% of the company, with four European energy firms, one in France, one in the Netherlands, two in Germany, sharing the rest of the 49% of the stock, having the right to control downstream sales of inexpensive natural gas. So this essentially all confirmed America's political fears. Putin would now have an additional and much needed major source of income, and Germany and the rest of Western Europe would become addicted to low-cost natural gas supplied by Russia, while diminishing European reliance on America.
So let's see. At the end of the day, we've still got the United States and Russia as adversaries. And Europe in the middle. Anything that makes Europe more dependent on Russia and therefore vulnerable to Russian pressure would be viewed in the harshest terms by the United States.
By the government.
Right. Is it unreasonable to think that way?
Well, here's the thing. Once again, they say they do this for democracy. They say
forget
they do
about
this
the
to
reasons,
help the public.
Forget about all that.
No, but I'm saying
I'm just saying straight plain old politics and grand strategy. Doesn't it stand to reason that if Russia and the United States are generally speaking adversaries,
are oligarchs,
if anything puts our allies in a weakened position vis-a-vis Russia, wouldn't it make sense that we would not view that favorably?
Well, put it like this: the rich, the wealthy oligarchs in this country are afraid of not being able to control the oligarchs in their countries, because ultimately, I don't think the American public cares one bit one way or the other. Okay, if anything, when they first destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline, remember that's when the gas prices went out of control here, and we were paying insane amounts for gas. This is about, once again, the things our government does are not to benefit us anymore. And I think we'll say what Russia's government does is about the Russian people. It's about, again, these are about wars between the oligarchs in their country versus the oligarchs in our countries. The oil companies in this country.
I mean, that's just like in the Middle East. I mean, the average Egyptian on the ground had nothing to gain, nothing to lose by the existence of Israel. Could have probably cared less.
Right.
Jews and Arabs had been living in quote unquote Palestine for centuries, ever since the fall of the Roman Empire. They managed to, more generally speaking, get along. They probably got a lot of blood connections.
Well, you had British Palestine.
Yeah. So the average ordinary Joe on the street, I mean, I'd even venture to say that the average ordinary poor white guy and the average ordinary poor black guy after the Civil War probably got along with each other decently. They had nothing to gain. In fact, there are those who made the argument.
Well, white supremacy has always made a lot of rednecks very hostile towards black people.
And white supremacy was always pushed by the white plantation class.
Right.
In fact, there was the argument in the aftermath of the Civil War that the poor white farmers and the poor black former slaves had much more in common with each other than either had with the plantation owners.
That was what the populists said. That was what the People's Party said. And, that's how you're right. The People's Party made that argument and sort of joined the two classes together before they were again split apart. But go ahead.
By the plantation class.
Right.
So it doesn't surprise me that the people with money have little in common with the worker bees. And they will tell the worker bees whatever they need to tell them to make noble defending their resources and their assets. I agree. But at the end of the day, as long as Russia and the United States view each other as adversaries, Europe will always be in the middle unless and until Europe develops enough independence to become a third party of its own.
Right, and it's always important for us to remember that when these wars start, they may use every pretext in the world about democracy or about humanitarianism. It's never about humanitarianism. Again, we have humanitarian situations in this country. We just talked about it last week about the East Palestine, Ohio situation. Now they just found out this week, Rev, that 43,000 animals have died since the crash around East Palestine. Dogs and cats and foxes, and you have lakes full of fish that are just dropping dead. And, and they're telling the people to drink the water. Hey, the water's fine. We tested it. The water's fine. Now, I wouldn't do it if I was there. I mean, look, that's up to you. If you want to drink the water, I'm not drinking the water if I'm in East Palestine right now. But I know a lot of people probably are not, don't have that much money and don't have much of a choice but to stay in their homes on some level. But it's important to understand that the wealth class in this country, like you said, the plantation class, they will always find a way to enrich themselves at the expense of the working classes of people. And these conflicts are, again, you can't underestimate how much money is being made by the military industrial complex and the energy companies. Next week, I was going to hopefully send you the story, but we just talked about how much money NiSource, which we call NIPSCO, has made in the last year. Record profits for them too. Magically, everybody, all these energy companies are making record profits while all this is going on. So it's important to understand when we vote for these people, when we give these people our votes, when we support them, when we, drag each other down to the mat over the Democrats and the Republicans and all this other stuff. None of this is about the betterment of your life or anybody else's life who's in the normal working class. This is solely about the plantation class enriching themselves. These are fights between oligarchs on both sides.
I wonder if the world's economic structure had not left that of the individual farm owner raising enough crops to, feed his family while his neighbor is doing the same. If it weren't for the fact that there are some people that convinced themselves first and then other people that a piece of metal that you cannot eat is more valuable than a piece of land producing crops that you can eat. Is it inevitable that there will always rise up this conflict, and groups of people will justify the conflict using whatever moral, arguments they can make, but at the end of the day, it all is because somebody wants to have more than everybody else. There's a line in Hamilton when George Washington is going to retire, and he quotes from an Old Testament prophet that everyone will sit under their own vine, under their own fig tree. And the Old Testament prophecy goes, neither shall they study war anymore. If the thing that Karl Marx offered in his Utopia was the idea that everybody owns everything, therefore nobody is competing for anything because everybody owns it all.
Right. Collective ownership.
Collective ownership. Well, that's another way of getting to the idea that everybody has enough. The Old Testament prophet had it where everybody had their own, which meant this is mine, that is yours, I've got enough, and you got enough, and we have no need to compete with one another to get more because we've each got enough. The Marxist version is everybody has it all, therefore there's nothing to fight over because who are you going to fight with? The problem is by nature we all need to own something.
Right.
When people talk about bodily autonomy, that's because we argue that we don't all own each other. That my body belongs to me.
Right.
My body doesn't belong to us. And we understand that when it comes to bodies. My body belongs to me, therefore this is my body, and you have your body. I don't want any part of your body because my body is sufficient for me to be me.
Right. I wish people had understood that during the pandemic.
But if we get into the thing where like, well, we all own all of us. We all share in all of us. Well, therefore, you know what? I need more hair. And you've got more hair. I need more height. And you've got more height. In reality, the idea that we all own everything is unworkable. It sounds good in a textbook in theory, but it's unworkable because we don't live that way.
Right. That's why I never became a socialist, or I generally consider myself a populist. I think there are some industries where there shouldn't be a profit motive, like the police or the fire department.
Right.
I think there are certain segments like schools where there is a public good. You don't want a situation where you have millions of children roaming the streets because their parents can't afford to send them to school. But in general, I think ultimately, like you talked about with the farmers, it's funny to me that Bill Gates and all them, all they do now is buy up farmland, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's all they do now. They made all that money with microchips and all that, but once they got done making all that money from technology, they just buying up farmland. Now Bill Gates is the biggest farm owner in America. I mean, the biggest landowner in America. I forgot how many. Let me see how many acres of land Bill Gates owns at this point, but it's an insane amount, and he owns much of the western United States land ownership. He owns much of the farmland in this America, so he owns some 269,000 acres of land.
Wow.
Yeah, 269,000 acres of land, and it's getting bigger all the time. So he doesn't own the majority of it, but he owns a heck of a lot at this point. And so it is important to understand that we do give priority to all these things, these sort of technological things, but the guys who are getting rich in technology, they are buying farmland. And what is Bill Gates doing with all that farmland? I have no idea. We have no idea. But we got to go to a break so we can hurry up and do the happy happies. And it's already 17. Oh my God, this show is going by so quickly, folks. Please stay with us here on WLTH 1370 AM. We got a commercial here from our own Councilwoman Ty Atkins. We'll be right back after these.
In celebration of Black History Month, Councilwoman Ty Atkins